Your team has to trust you based on your competence, based on your shared understanding, based on the intent that you give. If your team doesn't understand or trust you, if you don't develop that trust, you're not going to be able to execute. It's part of our nature to follow a leader that is doing the thing that you're asking them to do.
Welcome to the Hard Way podcast with Joe Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Races. We're teaching you how to overcome your obstacles in your life the same way we teach our 10 million plus Spartans to overcome obstacles on the course, with insight from the smartest, most accomplished experts from every corner of the world. Get ready to elevate your life today.
Joe Sena here, CEO and founder of Spartan and host of the Hard Way podcast. I've got a new friend of mine, Major Crayne, on from West Point in uniform, for those of you that are listening and not watching, and he is a leadership expert. Is that fair to say?
Never say expert because you're always learning, but definitely I teach officership here at West Point. I'm on my 12th and a half year here in the Army and just trying to impart what I can while learning in the process.
How difficult, for us civilians out there that are, just peering through the glass and taking a look at all the hard stuff you guys do, and ladies, how difficult is it?
Service in the military has so many peaks and troughs when it comes to difficulty. I was a lieutenant, in the 82nd Airborne, and then I served in the Ranger Regiment. I deployed twice to Afghanistan there, commanded, deployed to Europe as a commander, and now I teach here at West Point. And I think many would probably categorize that as like a pretty tough route, but also I would definitely categorize it as a really rewarding route. And there's different kinds of tough. There's intel officers. There is, psychological operations sergeants, and they have, different degrees of toughness. Maybe they're, more intellectually driven. Maybe they are really organized and they need to be a logistician. But a lot of times, whatever kind of toughness that you have, whether it's the physical aspect or the mental aspect, it's going to be paired with, the reward on the back end, the fulfillment on the back end.
There's really nothing in life that's rewarding that isn't on the other side of hard. Like, I can't imagine you come off the couch. I'm just thinking of my own experience watching a Netflix docuseries and feeling like really rewarded. Right?
Yeah. It's certainly like fleeting. Like, obviously, watching you're like, that was pretty cool. Probably what the hardest, like, concentrated thing I did as a young lieutenant, like straight out of college, was go to Ranger School as an infantry officer. Right, 62 days patrolling, lost almost about 30 pounds, very little sleep all the time. The hardest thing, and if you asked me like any single day, I'd have been like, oh, this is the worst thing I've ever done. Earning the tab and bearing it now, it's certainly one of the most rewarding things. And it's one of those things that you have to tell yourself while you're doing it, I'm going to reflect on this positively for the rest of my life so I can endure today. However bad today gets, even if today bleeds in the next day because you don't sleep at all.
I got two questions coming off of that one, and thinking about Ranger School and all the people I've met that tell me how grueling that is. One question is, tough to be a great leader if you haven't gone through hard?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people talk about Ranger School being harder than combat in some ways, and that is absolutely intentional. Ranger School produces, combat leaders. And if you're a leader and you haven't been tested, you haven't been cold, wet, tired, and hungry, when those tough times happen, after being a Ranger School graduate, you say, I've been tired. I've been more tired than this. I've been more hungry than this. It's been harder than this. I've been, in worse predicaments than this because the training was so hard that when we're in combat or something like that, it's like, I can handle this. This is a level 8. I've already done 9 before in training. And so that 8 feels very palatable. Hey, we can drive on. And maybe your soldiers have never been to 8 before. So they look to you. Hey, that leader's been to 9 before. I'll follow them if they say we can keep going.
Yeah, we all need a place to anchor to, right?
Yeah.
That helps us get through that tough time. And those around us, I think about my boys who wrestle or the girls who play soccer, like they respect that coach more if they've been through the battle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Ranger School is just kind of one part of it. It's kind of why leadership in the military is part of that aspect is experience, right? those leaders that have served in combat, those leaders that have done that training, that have those years under their belt, they can come back and they can reflect on, like, this is the thing that I did. Follow me. I've been there before. We're gonna be okay.
The other question I had about it is, do you think we're better off as a society, as a people, to push kids through something like that, even when they're not raising their hand like you did, right? Like, are we better off throwing them into that? Because 50% of the comments, if this goes to a social post, would be, he's crazy, he's pushing people too hard. What are your thoughts there? You've been around it a long time.
Pushing somebody to their hard, whatever their 8 is different as you go. Like, me now, my 8, my 9, my 10 is different than somebody else. I would never say, hey, everybody needs to do my 10. Everybody needs to go to Ranger School. That's not the case. Because before that, I had my own 10s along the way. I was an athlete in high school, and then I went to ROTC, and each time my hardest thing continued to elevate. It kept resetting that threshold about what is hard, what is developmental, because you survive after all those things, right? I was a high school football player, right? That's hard. It's absolutely hard. Now, reflectively, it certainly wasn't as hard as Ranger School, but when I was 16 years old, I was like, this is the hardest thing I've done. These practices, these 2-a-days are hard. But it allows you to kind of reset that threshold, and maybe young people and parents, I have 3 children too, just starting to get into sports. Parents can kind of see what that hard is for that age group, that child at that time. And maybe when it's 16, maybe it is joining the military, but maybe it's just, maybe it's Boy Scouts, maybe it's this sport, maybe it's this experience here, to continue raising that threshold. And again, it doesn't have to be this kind of physical hardness, because if you want your kids to go to a great school, if you want them to lead well, they're going to experience stress. And you don't want the first time they experience that when it counts, because then it might be too much, obviously.
I was thinking, as you were talking about the kids, and I'm thinking about like the 1700s or the 1600s or even 2000 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and again, I think about those social keyboard warriors that'll make comments about pushing kids. And as far as our existence goes on this planet, we don't even somebody like you or me who wants to push the kid. We're not even pushing that. It's nothing.
Yeah. That threshold, that perspective to understand, like, this is nothing compared to what people need to be. And it's kind of, it's where you base, Army training from. It's like, it needs to be this hard because combat is this hard. If you don't push them there, if they arrive to combat, they're not going to be ready. And so there is like an objective measure as to why training needs to be this hard, because you want, what the expression says, sweat in training so you don't bleed in combat. And that holds true.
Yeah. And for anybody listening out there, right? Like, if your son or daughter is not going in the military, they're still going to combat. They're still going to be launched from your house into the world, which is its own form of combat.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Whatever stressors are out there in the world are not going to give based on the blanket that people receive maybe early in their lives. I mean, just day to day, sometimes I reflect, like, whether something's hard at home, I'm like, well, at least it's not as hard as in Afghanistan, or at least it's not as hard as Ranger School or something like that.
Give us some tips on being good leaders. Obviously, one is, like, eat the soup yourself, like you did, right? Like, make sure you go through the hard yourself. But give us 3 things that, you've been around this a long time, you teach it. Give us some tips. Being
a leader means you have a team. You obviously lead yourself, right? And kind of one of the practices that we talk about is mission command. It has 7 principles, but kind of the objective center of them is all about trust, right? Your team has to trust you based on your competence, based on your shared understanding, based on the intent that you give. If your team doesn't understand or trust you, if you don't develop that trust, you're not going to be able to execute. And I think a lot of people maybe understand how to develop trust in a relationship or with friends, but they kind of see leading a team as something different. And maybe they don't create shared understanding. Maybe they don't trust their own teammates back, or they kind of treat them as if they're not part of this relationship. So, I mean, develop trust is definitely number one. And you kind of said maybe a second one that I'll go into, the idea, you said, eat the soup that you're making people eat, lead by example is right up there. It's part of our nature to follow a leader that is doing the thing that you're asking them to do. And I really think it's unethical or immoral to ask those beneath you to do something that you can't or you're unwilling to do. In the military, especially the Army, especially the infantry that I'm in, right? Officers, senior non-commissioned officers, they go through this hard training, right? As an officer, I'm not necessarily the one pulling the trigger, but I go to Ranger School. I go to these schools. I take these classes. I get physically fit because I can't ask my soldiers to do those things if I'm not able to do them as well. So, leading by example is up there. And I think probably, the final one is understand and embrace the profession that you're in and be committed to being an expert in it. That's going to develop trust. That's going to allow people to follow your example. If you're not good at the job that you're in, then that we're talking square one right there, right? Some people might be good at team dynamics. Some people might be very charismatic. Some people might be very popular, and sometimes that makes them leaders, or at least like self-espoused leaders. But if you're in the military, if you don't understand how to operate on the Bradley fighting vehicle, you're not going to be able to give good orders with the Bradley. If you can't fly the Apache or don't understand the Apache, you're not going to be able to plan a good maneuver route with the Apache. Or if you don't understand the howitzer, you're not going to be able to give good fire commands on it. So like getting down to the base roots of military expertise or just expertise in your field is kind of, the base building block before you can even kind of call yourself or even want to call yourself a leader.
No different, right, than we hear in the private sector where that boss, that CEO worked his way up or worked her way up from the bottom so that they know what it's like to clean the bathrooms, right? To do the tough work. What are we going to do about recruiting? Recruiting, no surprise, right? I could see it from the comments like we talked about earlier in the call, social media. You could see half the country is just not buying into it. It's this war machine. And I'm not advocating any of that. I'm advocating like all the benefits you're speaking of that come out of service. Imagine if there was some sort of a 1 year, a 62-day commitment post high school. You got to do the 62 days in Ranger School.
Yeah. Yeah. Recruiting is definitely having challenges right now. And I've transitioned to kind of being a marketing officer and kind of understanding this paradigm that we're in right now, what's changing. I think there's kind of two main things that I also think the Army's getting after these things, and the military in general is getting after these things. One, I think the military's objective benefits are kind of sometimes hard to understand. The pay, the medical benefits, the GI Bill, the school, the other aspects that are objectively there for your contract, the bonuses. Sometimes those aren't as clear as the private sector. Somebody's like, I want to go to McDonald's. It's like $15 an hour. That's pretty clear. But with the military, there's a housing allowance and there's a bonus that comes later, and then there's healthcare. Maybe there's a retirement, and sometimes that makes the decision a little bit more convoluted. And all that, at the end of the day, that requires the Army kind of educating people or the military kind of educating people, and people just taking a second look at the objective incentives when it comes to pay and medical and school and things like that. Just take a second look because it's very, very competitive in a lot of ways when it comes to those things. The second thing is, soldiers need to tell their story. They need to tell what those intangible things that they get out of the military. I think people a lot of times have this false representation. Oh, you joined because you had no other option. And then when you get out, all you know how to do is this Army thing. Hey, you're a tanker. And so what is driving a tank or operating a tank going to help you, in your business, right? Or your software company. And I think time and time again, you hear business leaders talk about, well, if you can give me somebody that has high character, somebody that's trustworthy, somebody that can put in the work, somebody that can lead a team, I'll take them even if they don't know anything. And time and time again, that's veterans. I attended business school at the University of Michigan just a little bit ago, right? So I, as a senior captain in the Army, being an infantry officer, being in the Ranger Regiment, I went to business school And, I'm not schooled up on business, shocker, right? But I can integrate with those teams, and I can learn from them, and I can put forward my best foot, what I know how to lead a team, analyzing problems, trying to find the best solutions, working with people, working hard. I know all those things. So guess what? I can learn, the other technical aspects, right? I got catching up to do, that's for sure. And so do a lot of veterans. I think a lot of veterans understand that too. But veterans need to be able to tell their story. Like, you're not going to learn those intangible things necessarily in other places in the way you do serving. And a lot of veterans leave and they have those intangible things they wouldn't have got anywhere else. And people need to understand, maybe if you're picking a route and you're deciding, hey, should I join? Should I not join? What are those intangible benefits? They should look to veterans kind of telling their story. That's the real value that I see outside of those objective benefits. It's something that you can't get in a lot of other places.
You and I spoke about it. I think we could really help give a boost, a shot in the arm, because we're the military for a day. You're the military for 6 years, 8, right? Yeah. Like, for one day, you just get a taste of barbed wire, rope climb, getting dirty, all the things that are the antithesis of how we teach our children to live. Don't get dirty. Don't do this. Don't do it, right? Don't play with barbed wire. And so I've watched, it's been 25 years now. I've watched these young kids that came into our system that had no business. They would never, boys and girls, never. And they talk about West Point, and they talk because they got a taste and they got to meet, maybe they met somebody that's, that was there with some cool equipment at one of our events on a base or something. And it just got them inspired. It's hard to get that inspiration, if you don't see it, if you're not around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see veterans telling their stories, but you're definitely right. Like, the same person that wants to challenge themselves at a Spartan race and wants to be at a tough point, wants to slip down that rope once or twice, is kind of the same soldier that we're looking for as well. Somebody, guess what? You're going to get knocked around basic training. Like, it's going to be tough. You're going to have a blister. You're going to be tired. But on the other side, it's like, that's hard to replicate. You're not going to get that anywhere else. And so it's the same kind of people. It's people that are looking for a challenge, but people that can kind of clearly see, hey, on the other side of this challenge is the service I'm going to get. It's going to be the feeling that I'm overcoming these challenges. Yeah.
What's your plan? When are you out?
Well, so I'm at 12 and a half years right now. The Army has a new retirement system, which allows you to leave. It's, it's another kind of thing that's hard to express. It's not just, stay in 20. So I'm at year 12 and a half. I love what I do. Like I said, I teach cadets right now. I have a really close relationship with a lot of cadets, and I try to develop them. It's amazing. So as long as I'm still having fun, as long as the Army is still good to me, I want to keep serving in whatever capacity the Army has me serving, whether that's, 20, 30, whatever, or whether if it's, if it comes to be in just a couple of years, it's not for me, or there's another opportunity, then I'll take that. So I'm not married to it for any kind of retirement or anything like that. I'm just married to the service that I can give and develop others. And so we'll see where that goes.
I love it. Let's wrap it with a couple of questions on, like, just if you're a civilian, you have no intention of going in the military, but some of the things you learned on, like, how to live, what lifestyle choice on a daily basis, like what tips should folks take on, what ritual to just be better, because you're held to a different standard than we are.
I think the easy one is get your fitness in check, right? It affects everything. If you're even thinking about serving in the military, obviously you have to be in some kind of capacity physically fit. And, all high performers, anybody that's going to be successful, their body needs to be right. They have to challenge themselves physically. They have to get up. And whether that's for somebody, whether that's a 10-minute walk in the morning, or somebody else that's a 6-mile run, it's going to set the tone for the rest of the day. And then I think, something that's not really espoused everywhere else, we're talking physical and now we're talking mental. That's not espoused in other colleges, other professions, is just this idea of being somebody of high character, right? Somebody that has habitual good judgment in all aspects of their life, whether that's, being kind to somebody, whether that's being trustworthy, whether that's being a good teammate, those aspects of who you are the same aspects of what the military profession is, right? A soldier has to be a high character person. If they aren't, we don't want them. If they're a low character, if they commit something that we don't like, they're out. I think daily, that's something that you can control. You can be a better person. You can develop other people more. You can be kind. You can make good judgment calls. Again, part of that, being physically fit is a good judgment call, right? You can develop yourself. You can study. You're not going to regret those things. And those are all within your control. And it's kind of the thing, like, we expect soldiers to be self-developing, expect them to want to be physically fit. If a soldier is somewhere, in an airport or something like that, they're going to, hey, do you want my seat? Hey, do you need anything? Hey, do you need a bottle of water or something like that? That's what we expect out of soldiers. Although we expect that out of soldiers, I think the average American should kind of hold themselves to that standard. Maybe if their own professions, their institutions aren't holding them, they should be able to hold themselves to that standard.
I love it. Thanks for coming. How do people find you?
I'm at Ryan Crayne. You can Google me at West Point. Will be some of my publications, some of my work that I do there. And you can also go to army.cjo, which is the Army Center of Junior Officers. It's kind of the hub that we use to talk about what being a junior officer, those first steps, how you can develop yourself and where you should look. Army.cjo on a lot of social media, particularly Instagram, is going to be some of the values that we espouse for our junior officers.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for doing what you do.
Thanks for supporting, and thanks for doing what you do as well.
You guys are awesome.